Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report on NTD television. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Texas officials today spoke at a news conference to fill in details about the police response to the devastating mass shooting. Meanwhile, on Capitol Hill, a bipartisan group is working to find middle ground on new gun laws. Senate Leader Chuck Schumer vowed to force a vote on gun control in the near future. NTD's Melina Weiskup has the details.
Families tonight continue mourning the lives of the 19 children and 2 adults who were murdered at a Texas elementary school. As the investigation is unfolding, Texas officials today revealed new details.
He walked in unrestricted initially. So from the grandmother's house to the bar ditch to the school, into the school, he was not confronted by anybody.
The officer said there was no armed officer available on campus and that the school door was unlocked, but they are still investigating why it was unlocked.
The majority of the gunfire was in the beginning. In the beginning. I say numerous, more than 25. I mean, it was a lot of gunfire in the beginning.
And as families are preparing funerals for loved ones, there's a renewed call on Capitol Hill to negotiate new gun laws.
And these families, my colleagues, don't want thoughts and prayers. They want their elected leaders to respond to their suffering.
There are a number of proposals by both Democrats and Republicans that are meant to prevent violent cases like this one in Texas. But so far, no proposals have been negotiated successfully. Now senators are reviving talks to find a middle ground on gun laws that both parties could support.
But the fact that there is a genuine effort for conversation may lead to something positive. I'm keeping an open mind. I'm reading some Republican bills that had been rejected before and saying, well, is there a germ of possibility here?
A bipartisan group met today to sort out how they'll move forward on these negotiations. There are 2 main proposals that the senators are looking at. One is expanding background checks for gun buyers. This idea already led to a bipartisan deal between Senators Manchin and Toomey after the Sandy Hook shooting, but it failed back in 2013. Now they'll try again.
Even though it hasn't happened in too long a time, we feel an obligation to give it a chance.
Another proposal is red flag laws. These would prevent people who are deemed to be a danger from having firearms. Variations of red flag laws are already used in 19 states, including Republican states Florida and Indiana. And Senate Leader Chuck Schumer today vowed to bring to the floor gun safety legislation once the Senate comes back from the recess next month. But he didn't specify which piece of legislation he would bring to the floor, whether that be expanded background checks, red flag laws, or some other form of gun control legislation. And while that bipartisan group has revived those negotiation talks, it's questionable, especially under this new pressing deadline, if they could reach a deal that could garner the 60 votes needed to pass the Senate. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Democrats are calling for stronger gun control in the wake of Tuesday's mass shooting in Texas. Debates have been swirling around how these mass shooting tragedies can and could have been avoided. It's when emotions are raw that it's easy to jump to conclusions with knee-jerk reactions. One thing that is undeniable is that there has been a dramatic uptick in mass shootings over the past 30 years. Yet people still had easier access to the same types of guns prior to 1990. Here to assess some of the possibilities as to why we're seeing these upticks, we have founder of Patriot Academy, Rick Green. Rick Green, thank you so much for joining us in the Capitol Report again.
Good to be back with you, man.
Rick, this shooter in Texas, he posted on his social media shortly before the rampage. There are many different perspectives about if more could have been done from, Facebook. They're able to censor political news or different perspectives about the virus, yet they haven't picked up on things when he said that he was going to kill his grandmother and then was going to commit other acts that he wound up doing. But then there's the other side of the argument that this could open the door to more censorship from social media. What's your take?
Well, I'm always against censorship in general, but if you have actual threats, that's different. We're not even talking about censorship there at that point. You're talking about an opportunity for something to be brought to the attention of law enforcement and for them to investigate. If somebody says, that they're abusing children or they're going to do things like that, that's something that you would typically turn over to authorities. So, yeah, I think, when they so quickly will shut you down for questioning an election or questioning a virus, but yet they can't pay attention if somebody's saying that they're going to kill someone, then you've got what you've really got is a lack of values, a lack of moral clarity on the part of these companies. And honestly, man, I think that's what this all comes back down to. We're going to continue to have carnage like this, and we're going to continue to have carnage in big numbers like this, as long as we're not willing to pay attention to the laws of nature and just basic reality, basic good and evil. We've been living in this kindergarten fantasy that all ideas are the same, that everything's equal, that everything's morally relative, that anybody can have any truth that they want. And when you create an environment like that, that means anything goes. We've got to get back to acting like adults and calling good, good, and evil, evil.
Rick, to your point, long guns and handguns in general have been part of our culture and society since the founding, definitely in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s as well. Yet we've seen this massive upticks in mass shootings starting roughly around the 90s. Why do you think that is?
Well, there's a lot of things we could look at. I personally think that there is definitely a factor here that has to be attributed to psychotropic drugs. Almost every mass murder that has happened, the person that committed it was on some sort of psychotropic drug, especially when you're dealing with these young adults or teenagers that are involved in these kind of things. So I think that's a big part of it as well. But I also think it literally comes back to moral relativism, actually saying to the culture over and over and over again, what we teach in our schools, what the culture reinforces, is that there is no right and wrong, that there is no good or evil, that all of these ideas are the same. And that creates an environment where if you have a troubled kid, they start thinking that crazy thoughts that they have are okay as well because the culture is telling them to do anything. Now, what you're going to see happen right now, of course, politically, is everybody's going to look for some other excuse, because we don't want to come back to that basic idea of good and evil. So it all comes back to the right philosophy. There's evil in the world and there's good in the world. And adults would recognize that there's evil in the world, and therefore we need more good. We need more good guys and gals with guns that are trained to defend whenever the wolf shows up.
Rick, I think you make a very interesting point. I mean, when you look at the moral values and just life in the 50s and 60s, it's definitely a stark contrast to the way we have developed over the past 2 decades. And even further to your point, we've heard many elected officials, specifically in Texas, Lieutenant Governor, members of Congress, they're saying that this will happen again unless we resolve the spirituality crisis in the country. Are we faced with a moral crisis from your perspective?
100%. I look at Paducah, Pearl, Jonesboro, Littleton, Santa Fe, now Uvalde, mass murder event after mass murder event. And you look at the things that are happening in the culture, and I think you can go back to Thomas Jefferson, who said, "Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure if we remove their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God?" And what he was saying was, if you remember your freedom comes from God, you live a certain way, you teach certain things, and you follow those principles. And so whether a citizen believes in God or not, or has faith or not, they have to recognize that society operates in a very different way when you believe in the laws of nature and nature's God as a culture. And so if you're teaching the culture that there are laws of nature and nature's God, the culture acts a certain way. Of course you're going to have outliers. Of course you're going to still have evil and crazy people that do crazy things. That's going to happen. But you're going to get a lot less of it if the culture is teaching right and wrong and encouraging people to do right.
Rick Green, thank you.
Good to be back with you.
And a New York State appeals court has ruled that former President Trump, along with Ivanka Trump and Donald Trump Jr., must testify. A 4-judge panel upheld an earlier decision by a Manhattan judge to subpoena Trump and his children to testify. This is part of an investigation by New York Attorney General Letitia James into the Trump Organization's business practices. The Trumps could still appeal the ruling to the State Court of Appeals. If Trump is forced to testify, anything he says can be used against him in a criminal probe by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.